$100 in your wallet. Now imagine that you have $200 in your wallet. Now imagine that I tell you in 6 weeks, all of that money, even though you have it physically, is going to be worth $0, no matter what you do. That's exactly what India did to its citizens in 2016. They decided to take the 500 rupee and the 1,000 rupee and destroy it from existence in their economy as they knew it. They decided to reprint all of their money. Now that's, the New York Times reports that that's about 86% of their entire economy, equating to about $15.4 billion that they're just going to make vanish. After extensive research into the topic through Cal Poly's databases and many accredited websites like the New York Times or Times Magazine, I have a greater understanding as to what it is that India tried to do with this stunt and why they're doing it. So today, I'm going to talk about how India didn't accomplish what they had planned and how this process came at a costly price for both India and its citizens. So let's jump right in. India's elimination of high-value currency did not accomplish what they had hoped, but had some very interesting, fortunate side effects for the government. So the purpose behind this elimination was that they were trying to get rid of what they had thought was counterfeit black money. So they had thought that drug dealers would be introducing money into the economy, and then that would inflate prices. Well, what happened is that actually 99% of that $15.4 billion was returned to the banks. Only $0.4 billion was not returned to the banks. And so that just went to prove that India's research behind the fact that they thought there was black money in about 25% of that $15 billion was completely wrong. The Huffington Post posted Rames's article in August of 2017 where he pointed out that 99% of the bills had been returned. So people speculate that India did this to be able to tax all of this money returned to the economy. The New York Times article, "Should We Trash Cash?" sheds light on the fact that India required that if you had over $3,700, you had to explain your reasoning for having that much money. And then if you could explain it and they accepted that money in exchange, you then had to prove that you had taxed that money, or that India had taxed that money. And if you didn't, they taxed it for you and they gave you a penalty fee 200 times what you would have originally owed. But now let's change gears a little bit. The elimination of high-value currency also came at a great price with little reward. Financial Express wrote an online article that it published last year showing that the cost of printing this money actually doubled. So say they were printing $1 bills and it cost them $1 to print every dollar. Now it's costing them $2 to print every dollar. This is because the material that they're using is twice as thick. So then they had to rebuy all of their printing presses and then print $15.4 million. That was no cheap expense on India's part. The second point, and probably the most important point of all of this, is that DT Television reported in August of 2018 that India's replacement of currency led to hardships for hundreds of millions of Indians employed by the country's vast informal sector of the economy. Their informal sector of the economy is a lot like our denios, or a lot like our flea markets. It's a lot of people creating goods with their hands and then selling them on the streets. And so a lot of those people don't have actual legitimate businesses within India, and it makes up about 75% of their economy. And so what happened is when those people tried to exchange their money out with the banks, they ended up having to explain why they had more than $3,700, and many of them didn't get the exchange. India did not give it to them. And even if they did get it, then they had no proof of taxation, and India would times their fee that they were supposed to pay by 200 and force them to pay it. And so a lot of them just ended up not being able to provide the correct amount of money and completely went out of business. But I think another really interesting thing is that over 100 deaths were reported throughout the process of this 6 weeks as people tried to return their money. Lines were 3/4 of a mile long. It would take days for people to get through these lines, and so many people were just dying of exhaustion and would end up giving up. The longest line was recorded at 1.5 miles, but the average line was 3/4 of a mile, sorry. And so, to conclude all of this, India's idea to demonetize currency was far from a success. It only wreaked havoc on the informal sector of the economy and cost the Indian government a pretty penny to restructure its financial system without any real reasoning. This is important to you because you have to realize that the United States may look at this as a viable option to restructure our financial system. But luckily, the United States gets to vote on things. And so it's really important that we stay informed on these types of things to see what could go wrong if this was us. Granted, it's very different, but just keep these things in mind and be informed about worldly things going on. I hope you all learned something today about India's interesting choice in swapping out their currency and learned to keep a close eye on governmental's use of power.